Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Mailbox for the 15th of October 2012. My name is TotalBiscuit, bringing you your daily dose of community interaction, gaming discussion, and all that good stuff. You can email in mailbox at cynicalbrit.com, that's mailbox at cynicalbrit.com, with topics for future shows. The game in the background is probably XCOM or FTL, one of the two things that I've been playing a great deal of. I have played more of XCOM, I think, than any other game I have this year. And it's still a buggy piece of crap. I'm up to almost 40 hours played. It is one of the buggiest games I've played this year. For a AAA release, it is atrocious in terms of how buggy it is. And this stuff still hasn't been fixed. It boggles my mind. I should have really known better. I mean, it's Firaxis, for God's sake. You know, I love that company to death. They make great games. But my God, they cannot bug test to save their lives. I'm pretty proud of myself, though. I just got the As a Scalpel achievement on Classic Iron Man difficulty, which is earn the excellent rating on every performance category on a Terra mission, which is extremely difficult to do. God, this game is warping my mind so much, I am actually caring about achievements. What the hell is wrong with me? I don't even know. How can I like something so broken? There's something very compelling about that game. This email comes in from Eric N. that says, your recent WTFs of Air Buccaneers reminds me, although indirectly, of a question that popped into my mind a while ago and stupidly forgot to send it to the mailbox. My question is about asymmetric gameplay, and mainly why hasn't it been explored as much as it should have been. You've covered quite a few games that have attempted it, like Primal Carnage and Natural Selection 2, and in my opinion have done quite well, but I cannot understand why this type of gameplay hasn't been explored more. Most of the time you just switch colors and change names. No mechanics have changed, except for the occasional extra ability. This might be because devs don't want to take the risk, but it's been shown that if done properly, it can greatly enhance your game. In short, why aren't there more games that involve asymmetric gameplay? Well, I think it is for the reason that you've just given, honestly. It is a risk thing, and there are a variety of risks associated with it, not least the risk that the community will complain about balance. And the thing is, usually I would say, oh, balance wine is la-di-da, but when you go into a game that has asymmetric gameplay, you have severe concerns about balance. Very, very big concerns indeed. How do you balance asymmetrically? It's easy to say, oh, well, this is balanced when the opponent has exactly the same thing you do. Even then, you still run into problems. You get access to the same guns in Call of Duty, for instance, but there are some guns that are considered overpowered, some loadouts that are considered overpowered. You'll always get that. And what ends up happening there is you decrease the overall variety of play because everyone wants to use the loadouts that actually work the most effectively. So it kind of balances things out, but it does reduce the quality of the game as a direct result of it simply being more boring. You know, there's just less people using less variety of loadouts, and there's just less diversity across the board. Now, when you get into an asymmetrical multiplayer game, it's not just about lack of variety, it's about the fact that whoever's playing on Team A has an inherent advantage over the guys playing on Team B, and nobody wants to play on bloody Team B. And it is a nightmare. It is really, really difficult to deal with. However, I don't necessarily agree that it's not attempted all that often. I think you can look at games like Natural Selection and Primal Carnage and say, hey, this is asymmetric gameplay. You know what else is asymmetric gameplay? Almost every RTS ever released. Consider that. This is a genre that is basically built on competitive asymmetrical gameplay. We're talking about the idea that players have access to different races and factions that all have different units, and there are plenty of examples of that. It's funny that we even use the term asymmetric. I mean, it's right. It is, in fact, asymmetrical. But I think lately, asymmetric gameplay has actually been referring to stuff like the Nintendo Wii U, and the idea that you have like 4 players doing one thing and then one guy doing the other, and then you get this asymmetrical multiplayer. But no, and the concept has been around for a very, very long time indeed, ever since RTS first started presenting each team with different units. There actually aren't all that many examples of RTS that didn't do it. Even Warcraft 2, which has a lot of similarities, you know, your basic units have exactly the same stats and things like that, it still had different spells. So even then, you had asymmetric elements, and even then, you had balance complaints. So consider how risky it is to create a game where that isn't the case. In RTS, it seems to work just fine. I guess it's probably down to the fact that everything is calculated, and you can figure it all out mathematically. You know this guy's going to hit this guy, you know that this is true, and it will happen 100% of the time, ergo you can balance around that idea, and of course around the idea that you as a player are going to have access to a whole bunch of different units, and that's where the balance comes in. There are arguments that StarCraft Brood War is one of the most balanced games of all time, but the funny thing about that game is it's only balanced because it's so inherently unbalanced. When you look at it on paper, there's a bunch of stuff in that game that is incredibly overpowered, but everything being overpowered sort of balances things out a bit, and there are appropriate counters to everything, and that's the most important. It's when you get into a situation where there aren't counters to it. Now, when you take that principle and apply it to other games, and things start to get really weird, because additional player-driven factors come into play. If you try and do asymmetrical first-person shooters, then you run into all manner of different balance complaints, because you are bringing in the human element way, way more. You can't necessarily build all of the units that you need to counteract this push, and you have to rely on more than one player. So I, as a player, think, oh, right, well, I know how to counter what they're doing, but I have no means to do it myself. So that creates all manner of nonsense. Overall, I've got to say, really, that the idea behind asymmetric multiplayer, like, say, Primal Carnage, which is Dinos versus Humans, or Natural Selection 2, which is Marines versus Aliens, is something that only really works in certain games. And I don't think you should really be forcing it into the genre per se. I don't have a problem with everyone having the same stuff as I do, and it just being down to a contest of skill. In fact, I think for the most part that's preferable. And I think if you're going to go for asymmetric, you've got to do it in such a way that makes sense within the game itself. Natural Selection 2 wouldn't be anywhere near as fun if it wasn't Aliens versus Marines. That creates a very unique dynamic and sense of tension. Primal Carnage, the entire principle is based around asymmetrical multiplayer, so I think it has to come down to building your game around that idea and that core concept to begin with. And if you don't do that and you tack it on, then you run into problems. And I don't think that every dev really wants to create games like that, and there are only limited settings and limited themes and aesthetics that you can really use to make a game like that actually work. This one comes in from Anon that says, recently it was discovered that the premium ads for Battlefield 3 no longer advertise the 2 remaining expansions for the game as including new weapons. There have been images pulled from the original ads which show new weapons as being listed as features of the new expansions Aftermath and Endgame, but they were removed shortly after the release of the Armored Kill DLC, which is also missing features listed in the original ads. Battlefield 3's DLC has been offered in one large pack called Premium, which offered all the DLC plus other perks for the game at a $50 price tag. Now, there are quite a few people that are very disappointed and outraged by this change, having already paid for all the DLC when these features were advertised and now won't be getting entirely what they paid for. Do you think this is fair practice from EA and DICE? No, it's not. I mean, it is actually in some countries illegal. Now, before I say anything, please do not take this as legal advice. I am not a real lawyer. I have a law degree I don't practice, and you should never take legal advice over the internet anyway. What the hell's wrong with you? Go to a real lawyer if you actually want legal advice. But here's the thing. So, in the UK, there's something called the Sale of Goods Act. It's a pretty old piece of legislation, but it is used to protect consumers from companies pulling all manner of BS, and it gives you, amongst other things, refund rights in the event that a product is not shipped as advertised. And this is exactly that. I mean, this definitely qualifies. And what I would say is that it is very clear that some players would have purchased or indeed pre-purchased these expansion packs on the understanding and with the desire to acquire these new weapons that supposedly would actually appear in the game. And if they're not going to appear in the game after that, then it's blindingly obvious what should be done here. EA and DICE should be offering refunds, or of course you should be pushing to get refunds yourself. Now, if you are affected by this and you want to get a refund because you pre-ordered the expansions on the understanding that they would include new weapons, and by the looks of it they aren't going to, then I would suggest that you look up the local consumer protection legislation in your country, and then you find out exactly what your rights are, because in most civilized countries you do have the right to a refund if someone sells you something and then it ends up not being as advertised or fit for purpose. Now, I'm sure these expansions will probably still be pretty good. Armored Kill's supposedly great, but as you pointed out, there were missing features from Armored Kill, which to me is absolutely unacceptable. And if you pull it from the ad before it, that doesn't really matter. The internet doesn't forget. The internet has an infinite memory, and if you put something on the internet, it best bloody well be true, because if it isn't, then people are going to call you on it until the end of time. Once it gets onto the internet, it is in the wild, and there's no way it's ever going to disappear, regardless of how much you wish for it to. It unfortunately also highlights a rather annoying situation that we got at the moment. A lot of people are willing to pre-order or pre-purchase digital content, which doesn't make a huge amount of sense. Now, with Battlefield Premium, it is supposedly saving you money, so you can definitely understand that. These are not the only features of the Battlefield Premium purchase. You get all sorts of other stuff. Box cutter, yeah! Ugh, God, why on earth would you even want it? But whatever the case, I can understand why people pre-purchased it, and I'm not even saying that these people are stupid, because if you're going to purchase something like Premium or indeed a DLC Season Pass, you are doing so because you believe that you will get this stuff anyway, and you want to save some money on it. So it makes sense. If you believe you're going to be playing this game for a long period of time, it makes sense to do something that would save you money in the long run. However, if stuff is promised and then isn't delivered on, then as far as I'm concerned, you do have recourse, and the law also says you have recourse one way or the other. And even if it didn't, you should still expect a refund or at least some kind of compensation from a decent company. Unfortunately, we are talking about EA here, so that is not exactly something that you should be assuming will happen. EA customer service is unfortunately rather legendary in how bad it is. Can I just say something? Well, of course I can, because it's my show, so I'm going to say it. Can you please stop pre-ordering and pre-purchasing digital content unless you have a really good reason for it? It's a dumb system. We shouldn't even have it. It's absurd that you should actually have to pay for a product before you get to thoroughly analyze it and make sure that it's actually fit for purpose. Buying games on day one at the minute just seems like a mug's game most of the time. You get so many games that don't work, and XCOM's a prime example. My god, is that littered with bug after bug after bug. I'm discovering new bugs all the time. And I love that game to death, don't get me wrong, but it's definitely not fit for purpose. The bloody thing barely works half the time. Now, when you get a significant bonus for pre-ordering, I could understand it, but if you're being offered a skin or some stupid item that you're going to be replacing in like 20 minutes, please don't pre-order games. I know it's being used as a metric these days, but really, it is encouraging this incredibly unhealthy marketplace where people are willing to pay for games months in advance and knowing next to nothing about them, and they don't even get the chance to read reviews and actually do any research before they put their money down. Now, I'm not really blaming the companies for this per se. I'm blaming the consumers for even buying into it in the first place. It's just a ridiculous idea. Please stop doing it. When you pre-order a game, you're essentially licensing a company to do whatever the hell they want with it, and it doesn't matter because they already have your money. Pay for it when it's good. Pay for it when it works. Pay for it when it's patched. Pay for it when you know that the title is actually worth your money because reviewers have had a chance to actually look at it and tear it to pieces. This email comes in from Argon that says, in a recent mailbox, you presented the idea that developers and publishers may soon start to consider LPs, or particularly linear games, to be piracy, and suggested that they might end up taking action against YouTubers who produce such content. However, I personally like to watch LPs of games that have gameplay mechanics which I don't have the patience for, or otherwise don't like, but still have interesting stories, so that I can experience those stories without the tedium of having to deal with the gameplay mechanics I'd rather not bother with. I don't think I'm alone in this. Watching these LPs gets me interested in the developer, and I often look them up to see what other games they've done. If I like the way they tell stories, I think this helps them out in the long run, even though the LPs themselves don't amount to any extra profit from the developer for the particular game in question. If we end up entering an era where publishers or devs start cracking down on YouTubers for this sort of thing, do you think it will hurt or help their bottom line in the long run? Perhaps they won't even think about the question of piracy versus brand awareness. Human nature would suggest that people will focus only on the negative, in this case piracy. Still, this industry has surprised me on many occasions. So here's the problem right now. The companies are just kind of getting around to the idea that YouTube is a thing now, and it's a very big thing indeed, and the old guard of media is basically dead when it comes to games journalism. Now, here's an example. PC Gamer magazine currently circulates 24,443 copies. If I ever got 23,443 views on any one of my videos, I'd wonder what the hell went wrong. This may sound arrogant, but no, it's actually the reality of the situation. It is a very, very small number compared to the stuff that you get on YouTube and even forms of new media. There are even blogs that get more views than that. Reddit posts frequently get more views than that. It's an absurdly low number, and yet, for some reason, that magazine still has some influence, and I'm not really sure why. I think it is because these companies have not gotten around to the idea that this stuff is dead. It might be sad. I mean, some people consider it sad. There are some great people who have worked at PC Gamer. Most of them now work for Rock Paper Shotgun, but more to the point, there are some good journalists still involved in that magazine, and of course in many other old-school websites that still do written reviews. There are some good reviewers at IGN. There are many good reviewers at Giant Bomb. In fact, that's one of the sites that I respect the most. But we are now in an era where YouTube has far more power. If you were to look, for instance, at the statistics for people that viewed Dishonored reviews, if I search for a Dishonored review, funnily enough, my WTF isn't even a review, and doesn't have review anywhere in the title or even written in the description, and yet it has more views than any other Dishonored review or critic style content anywhere on the internet. It blows it all out of the water. It's at 400,000 views after a week. And I'm not even one of the biggest channels. And yet it's taken us so long to actually get companies to play ball with us, to get Bethesda and Square Enix and other publishers actually on board and understanding how important this is. And companies are starting to come around to it. So the real risk is that because companies are so very slow with adapting to YouTube, that they will see it as a threat. And we've seen examples of this happen many times before in the evolution of media. We have indeed. The RIAA and the MPAA have pushed through legislation, have lobbied to try and damage and restrict and repress new technologies. What does the old guard do when they're threatened by the new up-and-comer? They try and stamp on it as much as possible. There is a great benefit in allowing people to actually put this content on the internet. Why? Because it serves as free advertising. And as you've accurately pointed out, there are some people that just wouldn't play it anyway. However, as I've said before, with games coming out that are more story-driven, more scripted, and based on cinematic exposition, the greater the risk, I feel, that companies will turn around and say, this is essentially piracy. You are getting to experience what the game has to offer without actually buying and playing it, and we are not okay with that anymore. I don't think we're really going to see a full-on carpet bombing, but I think over the next few years, we may see some stupid stuff. An example of something stupid that happened just a few months ago. So, as you're aware, with the Game Station podcast, we play trailers. We do a little trailer roundup. And trailers are basically adverts. Yeah, that's what they're for. And yet, on 3 of those trailers, we got automated copyright claims. As in, you can't use this because it's not yours. It's an advert for your game. Why on earth would you restrict people from playing it? Are you mad? What is wrong with you? That's just one example of major publishers going batshit over the subject of copyright on YouTube and keeping a hold of their intellectual property to the point of insanity. I understand intellectual property protection, there's no question about that, but that's just nuts, and that's what really worries me. If companies can act so irrationally when it comes to content on YouTube, then it is not exactly much of a leap to suggest that they may very well come down hard on Let's Plays and general gameplay content at some point in the not-too-distant future, but they would be sensible if they didn't do that. As we have seen many times before, there are so many examples of series that have got much, much more popular as a result of Let's Play content. Magic is a great example. Terraria is a great example. Minecraft is the stellar example. Happy Wheels is another example. I wish it hadn't, but it did. There are even some fairly excellent examples of television series that got popular through piracy. There are plenty of examples of that. But good luck getting most major companies to do away with their old school business model. These people are dinosaurs. They are stagnant. They exist within the status quo, and the status quo is comfortable to them. And even with video game companies that you would think would be much savvier because they're much newer on the scene, we're still talking about people like Activision who are, like 30 years old now? Atari, that's about 30 years old now? These are big corporations with a long history, and they have a particular way of doing things, and they don't like seeing it disrupted. So I would not be surprised at all to see this happen at some point in the not-too-distant future. Okay, folks, that's me done for the day. Thank you very much for watching the Mailbox. I'd just like to let you know that as of the 17th, for about a week, I will be off to Vegas. I will be participating in SOE Live, whereby I will be casting the first PlanetSide 2 tournament, which will be very interesting indeed. If you happen to be at SOE Live, I'll also be hanging around, so I would love to chat to you. Please do come down and say hi. And I will also be celebrating our wedding anniversary, which is actually on the 20th of October. So we're going to do that in Vegas because it seems like a fairly good idea. So I will be away for that time. I have prepared some content for you, so you shouldn't go without, but don't expect the Mailbox to run regularly this week. Thanks a lot, folks. I'll see you next time.